The unseen threat emerges. The calmness of the sector was something everyone had grown used to. For years, it had been a peaceful part of the galaxy, where people and ships traveled freely between planets and space stations worked in harmony. Life went on as usual. Workers in their stations, merchants trading between worlds, and military ships patrolling far from danger. The stars sparkled quietly in the background, giving no hint of the disaster that was about to unfold. But that quiet peace was about to be shattered. On a routine patrol, a fleet of human ships was making its way across the outer edges of the sector when something strange happened. It was a small blip at first, something that could have been dismissed as a glitch or a misread signal. But then it repeated, stronger and clearer. The human ship's sensors picked up something out of the ordinary. A large object, far off in the distance, moving slowly through space. The crew on the military space station near the planet Eros had a sense of calm, knowing that this area had always been free of major threats. The station captain, Lyra, stood in front of the main viewing screen, scanning the reports coming in. Her mind was focused on the usual routine maintenance tasks and communications with nearby colonies. But this time, the reports were different. Her eyes narrowed as she looked at the data. An unidentified warship had been detected deep within the sector. It wasn't a fleet. It wasn't a trade convoy. It was something more dangerous. A single, massive warship, and it was coming closer. "Captain, we need to take this seriously. The unknown ship is moving fast," said Lieutenant Harlan, a communications officer, breaking the silence. Lyra turned to face him, her expression hardening. The station's AI had flagged the object as a potential threat. No one had seen it before, and there was no record of any enemy ships operating in this sector. The military databases didn't even have a match for the signature of this craft. It was like it had appeared from nowhere, without warning or explanation. "Alert the fleet. I want all systems running at full capacity. Get me a direct line to Fleet Command," Lyra ordered, her voice steady despite the unease spreading through her. The ship on the sensors was moving slowly at first, but its trajectory was heading straight toward the heart of the sector. It was almost as if it had a clear target. The humans had never faced an enemy like this before, and that fact made the fear in the air even more palpable. As the warning signal went out to the rest of the human fleet, the commanders of other ships began to react. The question on everyone's mind: was this a scout ship, a lone vessel sent to test the defenses of the sector? Or was it the vanguard of something much larger, an invasion? "Captain, this ship is massive," Lieutenant Harlan reported, voice trembling slightly as the size of the enemy warship was calculated. "It's far bigger than anything we've ever seen in our database. And its speed, it doesn't match anything we have in our fleet." Lyra's eyes remained fixed on the screen. Her thoughts raced. The enemy ship was unlike anything she had ever heard of. Every protocol she knew told her to prepare for battle, but it seemed impossible. How could one ship be such a threat? And who was behind it? The military had advanced ships, technology that had allowed humanity to dominate the stars. But the size and power of this warship made Lyra wonder if their technology was really enough to protect them from whatever force was behind it. The atmosphere on the station began to grow tense. Officers and crew scrambled, going through their drills. Security teams were placed on high alert, and the fleet commanders ordered their ships into battle-ready formations. Everyone knew the first minutes of the encounter would be crucial. They didn't know who or what was coming. But if it was a threat, they would need to act fast. Lyra stood tall, her gaze never leaving the screen. As captain, she was responsible for her people, her crew, and the safety of the entire sector. Her mind spun with strategies, trying to prepare for a fight she had no idea how to win. Was this ship a one-off, or was there more lurking in the dark corners of space? Just then, another officer's voice broke through her thoughts. "Captain, the ship is closing in on us. Its velocity has increased. It's not slowing down." The warning came too late. The strange warship was now much closer, its enormous size casting a shadow over the sector's moon. Its weapon systems could be seen charging, and its lights blinked ominously. Even from a distance, the sheer power emanating from it was enough to make even the bravest hearts skip a beat. The crew braced themselves, knowing that if they didn't act now, they might not get another chance. "Prepare for immediate action," Lyra ordered, her voice sharp and filled with authority. "We don't know what we're dealing with, but we can't let fear paralyze us. Humanity has survived worse. Stay focused, and we will survive this too." But even as she spoke the words, Lyra couldn't help but wonder, was this the beginning of the end? Or could they find a way to stop the unknown enemy before it was too late? The answer to that question, however, was still hidden in the shadows of space. The warship's true intentions remained a mystery. But one thing was certain: the calmness of the sector was gone. The unseen threat had emerged, and the galaxy would never be the same again. Mysterious forces. The warship loomed closer, its dark form now visible to every sensor in the sector. It was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered before. Its design was alien, sleek, and powerful. Despite its size, the way it moved through space was eerily graceful, as though it had been built for the sole purpose of dominating the stars. No one could identify its origin or its purpose. It didn't appear on any of the military's radar systems, nor did it match any known enemy profiles. The entire human fleet was on high alert, but the silence in the command center spoke volumes. No one knew what to expect. Captain Lyra stood in front of the large command screen, her eyes fixed on the approaching threat. Her mind raced. How had it come so close without being detected earlier? Was this an advanced enemy fleet, or was this warship a lone predator in search of its prey? Lieutenant Harlan, who had been monitoring the enemy ship's movements, turned to her with a worried look. "Captain, its course seems deliberate. It's almost like it's being controlled from somewhere. There's no random drifting, no adjustments. Every move is precise." Lyra nodded. She had sensed the same thing. There was a methodical, almost intelligent quality to the way the ship maneuvered. This wasn't some wandering rogue ship. This was an enemy, and it was coming for them. "Can we communicate with it?" Lyra asked, her voice steady despite the growing tension. Harlan shook his head. "We've tried multiple hails, Captain. There's no response. It's almost as if it's ignoring us." Lyra thought for a moment. Ignoring them. It was clear that this ship was aware of their presence. The question was, why hadn't it engaged them yet? What was the enemy's goal? A new signal flashed on the screen, one that caused the hairs on the back of Lyra's neck to rise. The ship wasn't just ignoring them. It was actively blocking their communications. Whatever it was, it didn't want to be found, and it didn't want to be understood. Every attempt to track its true origins was met with a powerful jamming signal, a technology far beyond anything the humans had developed. The fear in the room was palpable now. Officers looked at each other, unease written on their faces. They could feel the impending danger, but no one could predict what would happen next. This wasn't a normal fight. It felt different. It felt wrong. Meanwhile, in the heart of the warship, unknown to the humans, the alien commanders were watching the sector closely, their eyes glowing with an almost unsettling calmness. They had expected this reaction from the humans. The warship's purpose was clear to them: to test the defenses of this sector, to see if humanity was truly ready for what lay beyond the stars. The mysterious warship had already destroyed countless systems before this one. Each victory only increased its power. It had no intention of negotiating, no desire to communicate. This was an invasion, but the enemy was playing a game of shadows. They were testing the waters before the real storm would hit. Back on the human command ship, Lyra was starting to feel the pressure. "Get me a full analysis on its weapons systems," she commanded. "I want to know what we're dealing with before we make any moves." Moments later, the report came in, and the results were not comforting. The warship's energy readings were unlike anything humanity had seen. Its weapon systems were powerful, capable of devastating entire fleets with a single shot. The human fleet, despite being formidable, was no match for such destructive power. But there was something more troubling. The warship's energy source seemed infinite. It wasn't bound by any fuel limits, and that suggested the technology behind it was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. "Captain, we need to make a decision," Lieutenant Harlan said. "The enemy is closing in fast. If we don't act soon, it will be too late." Lyra's gaze never wavered from the screen. She understood the weight of the decision they faced. The fleet could engage, but the risk of losing everything was high. On the other hand, they could retreat, but that would send a signal of weakness, something humanity could not afford. "Prepare the fleet for defensive formation," Lyra ordered. "We hold the line here. Let's see what this ship wants before we make our next move." As the crew worked to implement her orders, Lyra's mind continued to race. Why was this ship here? What was its true purpose? And what could humanity possibly do to stop it? The warship continued its slow, deliberate approach, its presence like a shadow falling over the sector. It wasn't just an enemy. It was a symbol of something greater, a force that could not be ignored. Humanity's survival was at stake, and the mysterious force behind the warship seemed determined to test that resolve to its very limits. Preparing for battle. The human fleet was in full preparation mode, every ship moving into position as Captain Lyra watched from the command center. The atmosphere aboard the military station was tense. Officers were working quickly, running through drills, checking weapon systems, and preparing for an engagement they weren't sure they could survive. Every man and woman knew the stakes were high. This was no routine skirmish. This was the unknown. On the viewing screen, the warship loomed larger, its dark shape casting an ominous shadow over the sector. It was still moving slowly, but its massive size and the power it radiated made it seem as though time itself was slowing down. It was like a predator stalking its prey, and the humans were the prey. They had never faced anything like this. "Captain," Lieutenant Harlan said, his voice a little unsteady, "the enemy is closing in on us at an increasing speed. If they continue at this rate, we won't have time to prepare fully." Lyra stood with her arms crossed, her gaze unwavering. Despite the overwhelming fear growing in the room, her mind was clear. This was the moment humanity had been trained for, the moment when everything they had learned would be put to the test. "Let's make sure we're ready," Lyra responded calmly, though she couldn't hide the concern in her voice. "Bring all weapons online. We need to be ready for anything." As her orders were followed, the fleet moved into formation. Their battle strategy was simple, yet effective. Defend the sector, hold the line, and wait for the opportunity to strike. They didn't have the luxury of knowing the full extent of the enemy's abilities. Their best chance was to rely on humanity's greatest strength, ingenuity. In the war room, officers worked quickly to analyze the warship's behavior, trying to find a weakness. They had no data, no history to fall back on. They only had their experience and their training. Commander Zara, one of Lyra's most trusted officers, called out from the analysis station. "Captain, we've detected a weak spot in the warship's energy field, but it's not in a place we can easily target. It's a small, vulnerable area near the rear of the ship. If we can get close enough, we may be able to exploit it." Lyra's eyes brightened. This was the breakthrough they needed. It wasn't much, but it was something. Something they could work with. "Can we get a ship close enough to target it?" she asked, her voice full of hope. Zara hesitated. "It would be risky. We'd have to get past its defenses, which are more advanced than anything we've seen. But if we time it right, we might be able to do it." Lyra nodded. "Make it happen. We need to act fast." Meanwhile, on the bridge of the lead warship in the human fleet, the tension was palpable. The entire crew was ready for battle, but the uncertainty of facing an enemy they knew nothing about was gnawing at their confidence. The military had trained for this moment. Yet it felt different, as though they were up against a force beyond their understanding. The enemy warship was now close enough to be seen in detail through the fleet's tactical screens. Its surface was sleek and almost organic, like it had been grown rather than built. It had no visible markings or insignia, making it even more unsettling. It was as if it had been made to be as mysterious and terrifying as possible. "Captain," Lieutenant Harlan spoke again. "We've just received a communication from Fleet Command. They're sending reinforcements, but it will take hours to reach us. We're on our own for now." Lyra gritted her teeth. She had known the reinforcements wouldn't be able to make it in time, but hearing it confirmed made the situation even more dire. The fleet was on its own, and the enemy warship was almost within striking distance. "Keep the fleet in position," Lyra ordered, trying to keep her voice calm. "We'll hold the line. Let's show them what humanity is made of." The crew got to work, manning their posts with a new sense of urgency. The seconds ticked by like hours as they awaited the moment when the enemy ship would make its move. It was no longer a question of if they would fight. It was a question of when. As the warship's engines powered up, Captain Lyra felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. She wasn't going to let fear control her. She had a duty to protect her people, and that was all that mattered. Humanity had survived worse challenges. They would survive this one too. She looked around at her officers, the men and women who had trained their whole lives for this moment. They weren't backing down. None of them would. The human fleet stood ready. They were outmatched and outgunned, but they had one thing the enemy didn't: determination. As the warship moved closer, Lyra knew it was time. The moment they had all been waiting for had arrived. It was make or break. "Prepare for engagement," she ordered, her voice sharp and firm. "Let's show them why they should never underestimate humanity." The warship's shadow grew ever closer. The time to act was now. The first encounter. The silence that fell across the fleet before the battle felt unnatural. The warship was now within firing range, and the tension in the command center was so thick it could be cut with a knife. Every officer stood at their stations, their eyes glued to their screens, waiting for the first move. The humans were prepared, but the unknown lay ahead. Captain Lyra stood tall, watching as the enemy warship's weapon systems powered up, its ominous lights flickering in the vastness of space. Her heart raced. This was it. The moment they had all prepared for was here, but nothing could prepare them for what was about to unfold. "Captain," Lieutenant Harlan's voice broke through the silence. "We're detecting power spikes in their energy cores. It looks like they're preparing to fire." Lyra's mind raced. This was the moment. The humans didn't have the firepower to match the warship head-on, but they still had their wits. She glanced at the screen where the target area, the weak spot in the enemy ship's rear, was marked in red. It was a small chance, but it was the only one they had. "Commander Zara," Lyra barked, "are we in position to execute the maneuver?" Zara's voice came through clearly, though there was no hiding the urgency. "Almost, Captain. We're preparing the flanking maneuver now, but the enemy's defensive shields are strong. We'll need to get in closer to hit that weak spot." Lyra nodded, watching the warship as it slowly rotated in space, its massive guns coming into view. The humans had no way of knowing how powerful those weapons truly were, but one look at the immense size of the enemy ship told her all she needed to know. If they didn't strike first, they'd be wiped out. "Fleet, engage," Lyra ordered, her voice a mix of resolve and uncertainty. The human ships surged forward. Weapon systems were activated, and blinding bursts of energy lit up the blackness of space as lasers and missiles were fired at the approaching enemy warship. But the shots did little more than harmlessly bounce off the warship's thick energy shields. The enemy ship's defenses were like nothing the humans had ever encountered. It was as if the ship was impervious to their attacks. As the human ships continued to pour fire into the warship, Lyra's mind raced. This wasn't working. The enemy was too powerful. The human fleet was being overwhelmed, and they hadn't even managed to make a dent. But just as the enemy warship began to line up a direct shot at the fleet's command ship, a burst of activity flared from one of the human ships, a small destroyer that had taken up position on the far side of the warship. It was the ship designated to execute the risky maneuver. "We're in position." Zara's voice came through, clear and steady. "Firing now." A single missile, powered by every ounce of energy the ship could muster, was launched from the destroyer. The human fleet held its breath, watching as the missile soared toward the rear of the enemy warship. It would either hit its mark, or the fleet would face certain destruction. The missile closed in, and for a moment, it seemed as though the entire universe had gone still. Then, a flash of brilliant light filled the screen, and the human fleet felt a glimmer of hope. The missile had struck the weak spot in the warship's shields. A ripple of energy spread across the warship's surface as the impact triggered a series of small explosions. The shields flickered, and the warship's weapons system staggered for a moment. The humans had found a crack in the enemy's defenses. Yes, Lyra breathed, her heart racing with excitement. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Humanity had taken its first successful strike. But just as hope began to surge through the command center, the warship responded with terrifying force. Its massive guns rotated, targeting the human destroyer that had launched the missile. In a flash, a beam of energy erupted from the warship's main cannon, cutting across the vast emptiness of space. The human destroyer didn't stand a chance. It exploded into a bright burst of light, its remains scattered across the cold void of space. Lyra's heart sank as she watched the destruction unfold. The loss of the destroyer was devastating, but it didn't stop the humans. Their morale remained high, and they pressed on. "Keep firing," Lyra shouted, trying to drown out the horror of the loss. "We've got a chance. We can win this." But the enemy was far from finished. The warship, now fully aware that the humans had found its weak spot, immediately began adjusting its shields. In seconds, the vulnerability that had opened up was sealed, and the warship was once again fully protected. The human fleet was reeling from the loss of the destroyer, but the battle was far from over. The humans had made their move, and they had discovered a crack in the enemy's defenses. They weren't defeated yet. Lyra's thoughts turned quickly to strategy. They had a weak spot, and they had to exploit it before the enemy could adapt. The warship was more advanced than anything they had ever faced, but it wasn't invincible. Humanity's greatest strength had always been its ability to think on its feet, to survive against all odds. "Prepare for another strike," Lyra ordered. "We hit them again, harder this time. We have to finish what we started." The battle had only just begun, and while the human fleet had taken its first loss, they were still in the fight. The warship may have been stronger, but humanity's spirit was unbreakable. And it was that spirit that would drive them to victory, no matter the odds. Humanity's last stand. The battle had taken a devastating turn. The loss of the human destroyer had sent shockwaves through the fleet. It was a brutal reminder that they were fighting against an enemy with seemingly endless firepower and technology far beyond their own. The enemy warship continued to hover menacingly, its shields now completely restored. But despite the overwhelming odds, the humans weren't about to give up. Captain Lyra stood in the command center, her jaw clenched as she watched the readings flicker across the screen. The fleet had taken a few hits, but they were still intact, still fighting. Humanity's survival instinct was in full force. "Captain, we're running low on ammunition," Lieutenant Harlan reported, his voice trained. "The enemy ship's shields are too strong. We're running out of options here." Lyra's mind raced. There was no more time to wait. They had to make one final push. If they didn't break through now, the entire sector would be lost. Humanity had no choice but to risk everything on a single desperate move. "We'll make a full assault," Lyra decided, her voice calm but firm. "We'll combine everything we got. Let's overwhelm them. We're not backing down." Across the fleet, the orders were given. The ships moved into a new formation, an aggressive offensive. There was no longer any room for hesitation. If they were going to win this, they needed to make their best shot count. Every ship, every soldier, every resource had to be focused on taking down the enemy warship. In the midst of the chaos, Dr. Tessa, the fleet's top scientist and weapons expert, had a breakthrough. She had been working tirelessly, analyzing the warship's energy system, and had discovered something vital. The warship's core reactor, the heart of its seemingly infinite power supply, was slightly vulnerable when it engaged its weapon systems. The shields would drop, even if just for a fraction of a second. "Captain, I think we found our opening," Dr. Tessa said, her voice filled with urgency. "When the enemy ship fires, its shields briefly dip. We need to hit it with everything we've got right after they fire. That's our window." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. They finally had an opening, but it was small, and it would be gone in an instant. The risk was immense, but there was no time to waste. They had to act. "All ships, prepare to fire on my mark," Lyra ordered. "This is our one shot. We hit them with everything we've got, right after they fire." The human fleet moved into position, their remaining ammunition carefully coordinated. It was a desperate plan, and Captain Lyra knew it might cost them everything. But she had to try. As the warship powered its weapons for another devastating shot, the human fleet watched with bated breath. Their only chance was coming. Then the enemy fired. The beam shot out from the warship's cannon, a blinding streak of energy that ripped through the void of space. The humans braced for impact, knowing they couldn't stop it. But as soon as the beam was fired, the warship's shields flickered, its power momentarily focused on the shot. "Now," Lyra shouted. The human fleet fired in unison. The combined force of their lasers, missiles, and torpedoes slammed into the enemy warship's now vulnerable core. The explosions were deafening as they tore through the warship's outer defenses. For a moment, the universe seemed to hold its breath. Then, the warship's outer shields faltered, and the human ship's weapons began to tear into the very heart of the massive enemy vessel. Energy burst from the warship's core, causing a chain reaction of explosions. The warship shook violently as the crew inside scrambled to stabilize the ship, but it was too late. The warship's core exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The shockwave rippled outward, and the massive ship began to break apart, its once mighty structure crumbling into space debris. It was a spectacular sight, but the humans couldn't afford to celebrate just yet. The battle wasn't over. In the chaos of the explosion, the remaining enemy ships, if there were any, still posed a threat. But humanity had made a dent, a huge one. The warship was no longer a looming shadow of destruction. Lyra watched as the debris from the enemy warship spread out across the sector. It was a moment of triumph, but it was also bittersweet. The cost of this victory had been high, too high. Lives had been lost, and the fleet had taken heavy damage. But they had held their ground. They had shown the enemy that humanity would not go down without a fight. "Fleet, stand by," Lyra said, her voice filled with both exhaustion and pride. "We've won this round, but we need to be ready. There's no telling if more will come, but we've proved something today. We can face the darkness, and we will survive." The human fleet, battered and bruised, held firm. They had survived against an overwhelming enemy, and as the sector slowly began to calm, they knew that humanity's resilience had once again triumphed. The fight wasn't over, but for now, humanity had shown the universe what it was capable of. The enemy had underestimated them, and now they would know the cost of that mistake. But as the fleet drifted in the silence of space, Captain Lyra couldn't shake the thought that there was more to come. This warship might have been defeated, but what about the rest of the forces out there, watching them from the shadows? One thing was clear: the universe had just seen the first victory in humanity's fight for survival, and that victory would echo through the stars. Victory or defeat, the human fleet drifted in the vast emptiness of space, the destruction of the enemy warship still fresh in their minds. The battle had been fierce, and the cost had been high. Many ships had been damaged, and lives had been lost, but they had achieved the impossible. The enemy warship that had once seemed invincible was no more, reduced to fragments scattered across the sector. But as Captain Lyra stood in the command center, her gaze fixed on the wreckage, a deep sense of unease settled in her chest. The victory felt hollow. The warship was gone, but something told her that this was just the beginning of a much larger conflict. The enemy, whoever they were, would not simply accept defeat. They would come back. And when they did, humanity would need to be ready. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission," Lieutenant Harlan said, his voice cutting through the quiet that had settled in the room. Lyra turned to face him, her heart skipping a beat. Could it be more enemies, arriving to avenge their fallen comrades? The warship had been just the first of many, and now the human fleet would need to face whatever else lay in the darkness of space. She nodded, her voice steady. "Put it through." The screen flickered to life, and Lyra's breath caught in her throat. The face on the screen was not human. It was alien, an intimidating dark figure with cold, calculating eyes that seemed to pierce right through her. "We are the Syndra." The alien voice spoke, its tone chilling. "This was only a test. You have passed it, but you will soon understand that the true battle has only just begun." Lyra's heart pounded in her chest as the message continued. The Syndra were a name that was not unfamiliar to her. They were a race of ruthless conquerors, known for their advanced technology and merciless nature. But until now, humanity had only heard whispers about them. Now, it seemed, they had been thrust into the heart of their war. "We will be watching," the voice continued. "Your victory here is meaningless. We will come for you. The sector is ours now. You will bow to the Syndra, or you will be destroyed." The screen went black. For a long moment, there was silence. The crew in the command center exchanged uneasy glances, their relief from the earlier victory quickly replaced by a sense of dread. The Syndra were real, and they had plans for humanity. What had started as a defense against a single warship had now escalated into something far more dangerous. Lyra felt a cold shiver run down her spine. They had won today, but that victory had come at a price. The enemy was far from defeated. The Syndra had sent their message loud and clear. They would return, and when they did, it would not be a single warship they sent, but a full-scale invasion. "What now, Captain?" Commander Zara asked quietly, breaking the silence. "Do we prepare for the worst?" Lyra looked out the viewport, the stars twinkling softly in the distance. Her mind raced, weighing the options. Humanity had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The Syndra were far too powerful, and they had already proven that they could destroy anything in their path. The message was clear. They would not stop until humanity was crushed beneath their heel. "We prepare for the worst," Lyra said, her voice resolute. "But we also prepare for the best. We're not giving up. We've shown that humanity can survive. Now we'll show them that we can fight back." Lyra turned to the crew, her eyes filled with determination. "The Syndra want to fight. They've got one. We'll take the fight to them, and we'll win. But we need to be ready. This won't be easy, and it won't be quick. But humanity has always found a way to survive, and we will continue to survive. We will rise." As Lyra spoke, a quiet sense of resolve spread throughout the room. The crew, though battered, were still standing strong. They knew the stakes, and they knew the cost of failure, but they also knew the power of human resilience. They had fought against the unknown, and they had won. The Syndra may have been powerful, but they had underestimated humanity's will to fight. The fleet's engines hummed to life as the ships prepared for their next move. The sector, though temporarily safe, was only a small part of the galaxy. There were more battles to fight, more enemies to face, but humanity was ready. The survival of their species depended on it. "Fleet, prepare for departure," Lyra commanded, her voice calm but unwavering. "We're not finished yet. The Syndra may think they've won, but they'll learn what it means to face humanity's wrath." The ships began to move, slowly at first, as the fleet set course for their next destination. The war was far from over, and there were no guarantees. But as the fleet sailed through the stars, Captain Lyra couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. Humanity had proven its worth today, and when the Cinder returned, they would face an enemy unlike any they had ever known. The fight had just begun, but humanity's spirit was unbreakable. And as long as they drew breath, they would never stop fighting. The galaxy would soon know the full force of the human will, and it would never be the same again.